Perfect. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, good morning, LinkedIn Live. Good morning, YouTube, for anybody that's watching on YouTube. I have flicked over to a new channel on YouTube, so it might be a little bit quieter on there. But good morning, people of LinkedIn. How has your work been? If you're watching live, I know it takes us a little while, Stephanie, to connect into LinkedIn. But if you're watching live, please do say good morning in the chat. Let us know how the weather is. Good morning, Stephanie. How are you doing?
Yeah, I am good, thank you. I am good. I am enjoying our outfit choice.
Yes, we are twinning. This is the first time this has ever happened. I've jumped onto a LinkedIn Live and somebody is wearing the same T-shirt, Rebellious Hope. I feel like saying, if anybody knows where this Rebellious Hope T-shirt came from, please do put it in the chat. Say good morning. Let us know where you are. But yes, we are wearing kind of the same T-shirt, although I feel like mine is completely faded. I can't remember. I can't remember whether it was gold to start with, and then it's completely gone. I don't know. We'll see. But maybe Stephanie, maybe you want to explain the Rebellious Hope T-shirt for anybody that doesn't know.
If anyone's not aware, so this was brought out, I think it was In the Style who collaborated with Dame Deborah, who was also known as the Bowel Babe, and really campaigned right up until the end of her life for better awareness and better research into bowel cancer. And I just really engaged with her message, with her fundraising, and I just thought she was so inspirational. And I think to do that at her stage of cancer and cancer treatments, and also literally she was campaigning right up until she passed away, and I just thought it was so inspiring. But I love the notion as well of rebellious hope, because I think sometimes the world can feel quite tough, and to be a hopeful person in this space can feel like you are rebelling against the masses. And so it was a really beautiful campaign, actually. I think it spoke to a lot of people.
Definitely. And to have, as you say, to have hope and positivity and be able to find that joy and that happiness, even in the circumstances that she was in, I think, as you say, is incredibly inspiring. So yes, Rebellious Hope, that's what hopefully we will be bringing to this morning's conversation. So I'm really incredibly pleased to introduce Dr. Stephanie Fitzgerald, chartered clinical psychologist. And really, and when I look back through your bio, you were a clinician for a long time. Are you still practicing? Do you still have clinic?
So in the loosest possible sense, so I no longer have a private practice clinic, which I've for many years. I would say I'm much more in the coaching space now, so clinically informed coaching, but still qualified, still do some with occupational health, do enough to keep my hours, stay accredited, that sort of thing. But life got pretty busy.
It's always, I always think whenever, and obviously it's Mental Health Awareness Week, which is so fortuitous that we've got this conversation, but I always think it's really interesting talking about things like health and happiness and well-being with clinicians, because you will have, over your years of practice, you will have spoken to so many people and kind of seen so many things that bring, kind of like ill health and, create situations where we're not happy, and how work affects that. So Stephanie is the founder of SOYO, which is a health and wellbeing consultancy, working with individuals and organizations to reach their full potential. And you spent over 2 decades in the space of kind of like mental health, psychology, leading wellbeing strategies, and have worked for many organizations that we would all recognize, like the NHS, but also some organizations as well, like Rolls-Royce, Premier League football, and even the atomic weapons establishment. That I was like, you've worked with like a real range of like organizations. So welcome, Stephanie. Thank you so much for taking some time out to join this conversation this morning.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Love chatting about all things well-being.
And should we start with the name SOYO? And before we started, I was like, is it soyo? Is it soyo? And that's probably because I'm sort of plant-based and drink a lot of soya milk. But so just tell us about the name Soyo and what led you to start it.
So it was a very practical choice for me. So my previous private practice clinic was called Fitzgerald Psychology. And both the term Fitzgerald, which is my surname, and the word psychology are very easy to misspell. So what I would find was people would put in, Fitzwilliam psychology or Fitzpatrick, or they'd spell everything wrong, and then they'd say they couldn't find me. So I knew when I wanted my new company, which has been going 3 years now, I wanted something that was very easy to Google. Wanted something very straightforward.
Okay.
But I'm a huge Japanologist. I love all things Japanese philosophy, and I study Japanese, and I love everything to do with Japan. And I was learning Japanese at the time, and my tutor helped me with the name and the words soyo. The characters, when you break them down, have different meanings, depending on which ones you use, but they roughly translate to things like new ideas, new generation, but also a gentle breeze. And I loved that, because I think so much in the wellbeing space can be quite demanding, and it can almost feel like another full-time job, to take care of yourself, your health. It can feel like something else that you have to do. And I love the idea of just a gentle wellbeing breeze blowing through. So landed on Soyo, and easy to spell.
Yeah, I love that. Soyo. It's a bit like, it kind of reminded me of FOMO, kind of almost like Soyo, that kind of, that's really interesting. And I love the link to the Japanese philosophy. Maybe we'll get into that. Maybe we will get into that, because I feel like that whole kind of like way of living, I think, sort of links in. Good morning, Catherine. Thank you for joining us. I'm wondering whether Catherine is also maybe twinning with a t-shirt. Obviously Stephanie got the memo, and here we are in our rebellious hope t-shirts. The link into like the Japanese, what got you into that space of Japanese philosophy? Why the interest in that?
It started when I was really young. It started as a teenager. I've always been interested in learning as much as possible about other cultures, and I grew up in a very small village in Berkshire, so I did not have huge exposure to other cultures, so I was always really fascinated. And Japan, I was lucky enough to go in 2019, so it had been a long-held dream to go. And there was just something about there's something about how grounded the philosophies are with nature and with the world around. So even though they're very human-centric, they're grounded in nature and that connection with the seasons and that connection with the wider world. And I think sometimes Western philosophies can feel quite lonely, because they're about the human and the individual, whereas Eastern philosophies, very broad sweeping stroke here, but tend to be much more connected to something bigger. And I just love that. It really appealed to me. So
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. When you said about the Japanese philosophers, the first thing that sprung to my mind was Ikigai, that whole concept of finding meaning in what you do, and finding work, finding things that you love at the intersection of all of these different elements of who we are. But certainly I was away last week, and I was in the East, in the Middle East, and I was talking there with somebody about, a bit like you're saying, the difference between like that collectivism and that sort of more collective approach to life versus our Western, very kind of like individual, me, myself, and I, versus the whole. And I guess the impact that potentially has on, our well-being and our health and happiness is incredibly interesting. But I love the name Soyo, especially the bit about the gentle breeze. So let's just get into how this applies to our work and our happiness at work. So one of the things that I sort of noted that you've said is that no one teaches us how to work, only how to get work. And so this is really talking about Reworked, and we know that you are the author of an amazing book called Reworked. So just tell us about this. What is it that we get wrong about how we approach work, and why does it matter?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I really noticed when I started thinking about Reworked and sort of reworking how we approach work is everyone will say to us things like, you have to get a good job, right? So you go to school, you get a good education, so you get a good job.
Mm-hmm.
But no one tells us what a good job means, what it looks like. And so we tend to rely on salary and status. Those tend to be the things we chase because we think, right, that's what a good job must be then.
Yeah.
And none of that puts us in the center of our career. None of that is about us, about what would make us happy and healthy, what would fulfill us, what would make us, what would interest us, what would help us to develop. And so I think we can get very stuck in our approach to work where we leave ourselves out of it completely.
Yeah.
We don't worry about ourselves. We're just so focused on the job. And I think particularly in early careers, we've probably all done that, where we almost ignore all the red flags, ignore our health screaming at us, ignore the constant head cold. We just crack on because that's what we've told ourselves we need to do. And so really with Reworked, what I wanted to do was really think about, how can I bring myself back into the center of my career? How can I start focusing? And that's not to say work isn't going to be stressful or it's always going to be great, because of course we're all going to have bad days and bad jobs and we're all going to have those things. But if we can center ourselves, that bit can stay constant, and then we can build things around it rather than losing ourselves in this sort of chaos of work and never really put ourselves first.
Yeah, it was really interesting what you said there about, especially like at the start of our careers, when, as you say, we think, you've got to get a good job, whatever that is. And, sometimes you can almost think about what a good job is in terms of, I always used to think, when you go on holiday and people would sort of say, oh, what do you do? Or people would be talking about jobs that their kids did, for example. You'd sometimes get that, oh, that's it, or, there are those those social responses to the so-called good jobs. But as you say, whether or not that connects with the individual in terms of, the things that really make them happy, the things that kind of give them purpose and meaning, we sort of forget about that, don't we? Especially at the start. And as you say, we're just thinking about maybe the salary, the status. It's a really different way of looking at it. So you've talked about the almost like putting ourselves more back at the center of the work. So how do we effectively do that? How does somebody start to think about that differently and kind of almost just go beyond the surface level things of the salary, the status, etc., the things that the neighbours maybe think about our roles?
Keeping up with the Joneses.
And good morning, Matt, as well. Thank you for joining us.
So I think for me, I talk about 4 pillars in the book, which I think help ground us back into the center of our careers. So when I tell people I work in Wellbeing, they sort of talk about, lettuce in the canteen, yoga on the lawn. They think, tick the box, job done. And they're very disappointed when I tell people what I actually do, which is, helping organizations have these strategies, making sure they're medically legally compliant, that they're globally applicable. It's just not as sexy, Cheryl. So people are like, oh, I quite like the side of the yoga, I'm not sure about the rest. But what I wanted to do is give people some tools so they could put themselves back in the center of their career rather than waiting for their job to do it. Because I really noticed that when people were trying to take care of their well-being, they were saying to their managers or saying to their bosses, I'm not okay, and almost handing it over to them. And I wanted people to feel much more empowered so that they could take care of their own well-being. And so what I came up with, and when people do ask me what I do, I say to people, well, I make sure that employees are happy, healthy, safe, and engaged. And if something is happening in the company that means they're not happy, healthy, safe, or engaged, I need to know about it. And that was really how those pillars came about. And in Reworked, there's actually a score that you can give yourself. It's not diagnostic in any sense, but where you can monitor, well, what is my level of happiness, health, engagement? Do I feel safe at work? And that's psychological safety as well as physical. But it's just helps you to almost baseline, where am I in the center of my career? Am I somewhere on the outside, not even featuring in my thinking, or am I right in the center where I feel happy, healthy, safe, and engaged?
I love it. I love the idea of the pillars. It's such a great concept, and with the spread there, happy, healthy, safe, and engaged. It's just it's quite holistic, isn't it? And I guess the thing about linking it back to what you were saying about the sometimes we go for the good jobs, the salary and the status, and they often, even just like with that first pillar of the happy, we don't often start there. And in fact, I was in a conversation yesterday where we were talking about the aspirations of Gen Z, and Gen Z may be looking for more happiness and more purpose and meaning, maybe because they haven't seen it from us, the generation of parents. And I think we almost still sort of turn our noses up at it, or we look at Gen Z and think, they think that life's a walk in the park sort of thing. It's not. Work is hard. Do you know what I mean? But so it's really lovely to see that happiness is one of the pillars, because we should be able to find some happiness at work, right? At least. So let's talk a little bit more about the world of work. And we had a conversation just before we went live, but we'll try our best not to depress everyone. But let's talk about the shifting landscape and things like hybrid working or mandatory return to offices, which actually a lot of people are experiencing, but also something like AI and how that's starting to affect more people, at least, sort of gradually, or the threat of AI, or, AI being very much on the horizon. To just talk about how that kind of like shifting world of work can maybe, disrupt some of those pillars, and how do we kind of stay level with everything around us changing?
Yeah, I think, again, for me, because work is constantly shifting, if we think of those pillars, they're almost the anchor. So it's almost something we can always come back to that keeps us in the center, because work is changing, and it's changing in ways that I don't think we're yet really aware of. I think, people, if we look at what happened during the pandemic, if you try and talk to people about COVID now, it's almost like, la, 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 I just don't want to talk about it, don't want to think about it. That was a thing that happened. And you see that with this push for return to work, return to office. It's not return to work. We've been working the whole time, but, return to office, really just pretending that it didn't happen. Yeah. And it's a, clin psych that's specialized in trauma for decades. It's like, actually, it doesn't work like that. You can't just go, oh, well, let's just pretend it didn't happen and it won't have any impact on us. And so I think we're really seeing these shifts that have quite big impacts, and we're now inviting more in with things like AI. And so I'm really not going to try and depress us with that conversation, but there are significant impacts that are not being fully explained to us. And I'm a massive AI optimist in things like healthcare. I think it could revolutionize. I think if you could get on the spot test result analysis, X-ray result analysis, if you were worried, if you'd had a persistent cough and you had a chest X-ray and you didn't have to wait 4 weeks for that result, if you knew instantly, oh, actually, I'm okay. Think of the impact on society. Think of the equality across healthcare that could give us. So I am an AI optimist for that. Do I think it's a good idea to get rid of all base level jobs? No. Do I think we are walking into, almost sleepwalking in to handing so much data and information, which we're almost making ourselves a commodity? And I think that no one's just talking about it. And actually, there'll be AI everywhere. There'll be people watching this on their laptops, and it will be loaded with AI that no one's explained the T's and C's of, and we've just clicked accept because we need to use the software. And it's just things like that where I think we could just do with a bit more awareness. But I think to bring it back, because we can't control any of that, and you can spend your life, this is why we felt the need for hope today in our t-shirts, because you could spend your life feeling very depressed about the world of work if you weren't careful. But the bit you can control are your pillars, are your anchors. You can bring it back to, what do I need in this moment to boost my happy, healthy, safe, engaged score? What do I need in this moment? if the world around me is chaotic, then how do I best protect myself? And so I really see those pillars as anchor points in the storm. So when everything feels very chaotic, I've got something I can bring myself back to.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Yeah, anchors. And you touched on something there, which was like the things that you can control. And I'm talking to an organization next week that are going through significant change. And I am framing it around the circles of control, my circle of what's in my circle of control, what's in my circle of influence, what's in my circle of concern, but I can't do anything about it, right? Because I think there is something, and as you say, so if you're sort of almost like using those 4 pillars as like as you say, an anchor for you, and almost like regardless of what's going on around you, whether or not it's, your organization has just announced that everybody's got to go into the office 5 days a week or 3 or 4 days a week or whatever, or people are talking about, using AI. So, for example, I know Copilot is now being rolled out in a lot more organizations, and I'm guessing a lot of people are going to be starting to feel a bit uncomfortable as they start to see the potential. I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs have seen the potential of AI much earlier than a lot of people working in large corporates, because in large corporates, there's been a little bit of, kind of the info security has kind of kept it at bay a little bit. But I think, people in large organizations now, I know when I join meetings and my note taker comes in with me, well, my note taker usually turns up to the meeting on time. So my AI note taker turns up, to every meeting that I go to, and then I turn up. And I know that with some corporates, they're like, what is that? What is that that's following Cheryl into every meeting? And so there is going to be those fears, as you say, but having those pillars and really focusing on what is it that you can control is a huge part, right, of kind of I guess staying quite grounded in what potentially looks like quite scary levels of change, especially around the whole AI thing. Yeah. I heard somebody say recently, actually, it was Alex Hermosi. I don't know whether you're a fan of his, but he said one of the things he says in his business is, if we can't control it, we don't talk about it. It's like that. As a team, if we can't control it, we don't talk about it. I thought that's interesting, an interesting mindset. Let's go on to talk about employee networks or employee resource groups. This is, an audience that I serve, and they are often, when it comes to things like well-being and mental well-being, even things like mental health, first aid, individuals that volunteer for these employee networks, staff networks, affinity groups, often kind of pick up the slack and almost become the sort of like the pseudo therapists in-house, right? They're often left exhausted, especially due to the emotional labor that's involved in those sorts of roles. How can employee network leaders support each other and support others while staving off burnout? So how can they be that person for other people without burning themselves out?
It's such a key question here, Cheryl, because, and we hear this a lot and we hear different iterations of it, but you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you've nothing left to give, you can't support anyone else. So you have to look after yourself. But also the key word you said there was support. And I think sometimes what managers, what ERGs, what so many of us fall into the trap of is trying to solve. So I'll solve something. So you come to me and say you're stressed. I'll try and solve that for you. And often we're not in positions of power in these groups. Like I hate to say it, but often it is that we may be leaders at our level, but we're not on the board. We can't better the sickness absence policy or, whatever it may be. We can't do something that makes a fundamental change. And I always say to managers, I mean, I think managers and leaders just have such a, I don't know why anyone would be a manager. I'm just going to be honest, like it's such a tough gig, just literally squeezed from every angle, aren't they? But I always think if we can understand, like your manager's job is to empower you to be the best employee, that to make sure that you are healthy, that you're safe at work, that you're engaged in your job, that you can perform at your absolute best. That's their job.
Yeah.
And they need to make sure that they're getting out of the way. So if they're doing something that is blocking, or if the company has a policy that's stopping you doing your job well, that is absolutely on them to help you solve.
Mm-hmm.
So what I think we need to remember is we are there to support. And so if someone comes to you and you're a leader and someone comes to you with a problem, what you need to know is what is the situation in as much detail as they're comfortable to share. What impact is that having on them that they want you to know about? So why are they telling you that? And what are they doing about it? Not what do you have to do about it? What are they doing about it? And where can you support? So, for example, if someone came to me and they said, I'm really struggling with my anxiety, it's off the scale, just, a lot happening in my personal life. Okay, what impact is that having on you? I'm struggling to sleep. I'm really struggling to get up in the morning. And I've found a really useful therapist. Then maybe my job as a manager is to say, would it be helpful to have a later start? If you're struggling to get up in the morning, would it if you're not getting to sleep till 2 a.m., is it better that we put in some flexible accommodation here so that you can start work a little later and you're not trying to get up just as you've gotten some sleep? And again, these don't have to be permanent. These could be short-term reviewable kind of changes. But also, when is your excellent therapist that you've just found available? Thursday afternoon. Okay, again, let's flex so you can definitely get that help and support. Let's review this in 2 months' time, 3 months' time, whatever. Let's check that. But in the meantime, know that I'm here if you need any additional help and support. What you've done there is made that employee feel heard. You've taken it seriously. You've taken positive action, but you haven't taken it on. And I think that's really, really key. You are there to support, not solve. Otherwise, you carry the world's problems on your shoulders, and it's very, very heavy.
I love that. I've written that down when you said that, support, not solve. Because I think that's absolutely key. And actually, and just in that small example that you gave, the way that you sort of phrased it, it almost sounded more like a kind of coaching conversation. Like you're almost you're kind of, you're sort of questioning and maybe suggesting the odd thing, but you are effectively supporting that individual to come up with the solutions. And you may be able to offer some assistance in that solution, but as you say, it's really the individual that owns that, right? So you're not disempowering them in giving that support. So interesting. So interesting. So support, not solve. And the other thing that you said as well, particularly about ERG leaders in particular, as you said, they often don't have the authority, the positional power, the resources, the budget or whatever to necessarily, fix everything or make everything perfect. So you're absolutely right. It is a supporting role. I often think as well, actually, for ERG leaders in particular, that often part of that support is the signposting. It's the signposting to other, as you say, other professionals and experts as well. Because they often haven't got the skills. They're not therapists. They're not trained therapists either. So that's something that's really interesting as well. Do you tend to, in your in the work that you do in organisations, do you tend to see more burnout in that population, particularly? Whether or not they're almost like official employee network leaders, but the sorts of individuals that do volunteer to do other things on top of their day job. Do you tend to see kind of like more levels of sort of burnout and, sort of like emotional ill health almost?
I do. And I think there's an element of burnout that no one really talks about, and that I'm quite passionate that we do talk about, which is rage. I see a lot of anger in those populations. And I think an element of burnout that people don't talk about is feeling thwarted, feeling stunted in some way. So I want to do something. I'm prepared to give up my time, even if that means I'm working longer or I'm taking on extra meetings, extra responsibility. I want to do something in this space. I want to make a difference. And you are met with, exactly as you've just said, no decision-making power, no budget, no resource, no whatever it may be. And you see people are so frustrated. And I see that more broadly across jobs, not just in the ERG space, but more broadly for people in their jobs. But just people, they're so angry and they're so fed up of being thwarted in their work. And because we don't really have an outlet for anger at work, certainly not in a print, then it's condensed, and then people burn out. But they're not, but it is almost, I always think of it as like lighting a match. Like they've got all this energy, and then they literally burn out with it because they've nowhere to put it. And they're like, oh, I'll spread all this energy and I'll light up the whole office, and people are like, oh yeah, that's great, but we're not actually going to give you any help and support and resource and budget and decision making. We're just going to sort of let you fizzle out. And then people are, and it's such a waste, because the people who are in this space, I mean, the wellbeing champions that I work with, the people that I meet, they're there because they care and they want to make work a better place for everyone, for absolutely everyone. And then you see it just burn out. So I think there is literal burnout, as in tiredness, exhaustion, what we think of traditionally, but I also see a lot of anger, lots and lots of just feeling fed up.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Do you know, I had somebody on here a few weeks ago that made me think about burnout sort of differently, and you've done exactly the same just now. Actually, I think there is something about, as you say, when we tend to think of burnout, we often go straight to workload, workload, poor work-life balance, but as you say, that there's an emotional thing. There's something about, emotions and how that leads to burnout. Do you know what I mean? Whether it's the emotional labor of doing the ERG, or as you say, the rage and the frustration at not being able to make a difference. I almost think that we don't have enough conversations about how those things lead to burnout. And almost, I want to test something against you, tiredness, in a way of, I remember somebody once saying that when you love your work and when your work energizes you, you don't feel tired. They sort of said, actually, it's when you don't enjoy your work that you tend to feel tired. I don't know whether that's so, but it just reminded me of the burnout concept, because I don't think it's as binary as, a big workload leads to burnout. I think it links to, what you're saying in terms of if you're frustrated in your work, and maybe linking it back to the pillars, if you don't have the happiness and you don't have, the health and the safety, it's those things. It's not necessarily just the workload. I don't know if you'd agree with that. Does that make sense?
I would definitely agree with that. So when I worked in the NHS, I had a very, I would say on paper, probably my most stressful job. I used to work with head injury and traumatic brain injury, that sort of thing. So neuropsych is kind of my specialism. And I would, I'd be in A&E, you'd see people who had really horrible accidents and they'd be coming in for assessment, and it was very full on. And I used to say to people, it's the sort of stress that lets me know I'm alive. I was almost buzzing. Like I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Right. And I'd work all these hours, and you're on your feet for, 12, 14, 16 hours, whatever it is, which you're not meant to be, but you can't go home because you can't, people on laptops, you can't just shut them down for the day and restart them the next day. So you'd be doing all these things that on paper should have been my most stressed. And actually I loved it. And then I can remember going to my first corporate 9 to 5 and feeling exhausted, like genuinely exhausted, and just thinking, different kind of tired.
Yeah, exactly. It's I definitely need to get more into this, but thank you so much for raising this, because I think it really does help us to think about, this, how we find health and happiness, and the whole burnout thing is slightly different. It's not just about the hours that you work. It's absolutely not just about that, which is it's so interesting. Let me just dive into the comments momentarily. Good morning, Nihar. So Nihar was an ERG leader. In fact, helped to co-found an ERG. ERG leaders start with passion. It's the only thing that keeps them going, but not being given the resources or authority leads to ERG leaders burning out. Hopefully it can change with time and keep them engaged. Good morning, Nyambi. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thank you for joining the conversation. And then I need to get on to Emily's comment. Let me just pull this up, Emily. The technology is a little bit slower than usual this morning, so just bear with. Emily's comment here, call me a purist, but ERG folks, I'm not going to be able to read the second half of this comment, Emily, because I can see it's quite long, but ERG folks should never be responsible for emotional or wellbeing support. I agree, Emily. Concerns have to go back up to the people responsible for this, signposted, to use Cheryl's words. I also am not always in agreement with EDI people being responsible for wellbeing unless they officially have the dual responsibility and qualifications related to mental health or wellbeing. It's pretty dangerous for EDI practitioners to be lent on for emotional support, can be distracting. You're so right, Emily. I'll see if I can dive onto my other screen to see the rest of your comment. But I couldn't agree with you more, Emily. I've done some work where I've gone into organizations, and there's been a lot of the ERGs have been set up almost with this principle of being emotional or well-being support, and I've had to be like, okay, we need to just really understand what does that look like, and actually what capacity, and as you say, Emily, what skill set do these individuals have to even be able to do that? And then let's reframe it, in terms of the signposting. There is, what are your thoughts, Stephanie, about why these individuals do tend to be the ones that people go to, for support, etc.? What why does this happen?
I think sometimes they're pushed. I think I will say that. Yeah. I think sometimes they're, so I've certainly, because first of all, completely agree. This should not be I think dangerous things can happen when people who aren't qualified are forced to act in a space as though they are. So signposting is absolutely the start and finish of people's responsibilities in these roles. I've definitely seen some really scary things where mental health first aiders talk about, I'm running my clinics on these days, and I'm like, you're not qualified to run clinics, and it's not just a bad idea in terms of the support they'll be able to offer people, but also in terms of medical legal compliance and leaving companies legally vulnerable. They have to think about these things. So I do think, though, that sometimes a mental health group or a wellbeing group will be set up, and managers can almost think, phew, I don't have to worry about that now. So I go to my manager and I say, I'm feeling very overwhelmed and stressed. And they go, oh, that sounds like mental health. You should go and join the ERG. Go to the mental health awareness talk. Go and join this webinar and whatever, rather than, okay, how is that impacting you? What support do you need from me? It's almost and I've almost seen managers delegate managerial responsibility to ERGs and sort of, almost palm people off. And I think as the individual, that must feel horrible, because I've been brave enough to raise something to my manager and they're almost sidestepping it and moving me somewhere else, and not necessarily in an appropriate signposting way, almost in a palming off way. But also I think for the manager, they're then so vulnerable because they don't know the conversation that's then being had, and what if it was something I needed to know about? But again, I think managers are so squeezed. I get why they do it, but I do think these individuals can sometimes be so overwhelmed. They volunteer to help make things a bit better in the workplace, and suddenly they feel like they have to run clinics. It's a very scary space.
It is. It really is. I mean, let's go on. That probably links in really nicely just to our next question about, almost like rules and habits and ways of working. I've sort of got it down as inherited work cultures and past beliefs. So some of the hidden rules or habits that we need to navigate, learn or unlearn in order to thrive at work. And I guess that's whether that's for us as individuals in terms of how we work, but also maybe for managers as well, a bit like you were saying, some of those ways of dealing with individuals when they maybe flag that they need additional support. What are some of the things that we need to learn or unlearn that we used to do, so badly, that kind of got us to this epidemic of, sort of poor emotional health at work?
Yeah, I really like the idea of unlearning, because I think on an individual basis, we can sometimes base ideas that we have about ourselves on things that we learned years ago, like maybe even at school, like, you know, we learned them ages ago. And we can then have this belief of, I'm not a XYZ person, so I'm not good with maths, I'm not great at people skills, I'm not a brilliant manager, I'm not. And we can have all these ideas, or someone might have said to you once, oh, you're not really a team player, and then you think, oh, right, okay, well that's, you know, that's really stuck with me, and that's sat heavy on my heart, and now I don't think of myself as a team player. And what I will say is, I work with grown adults who won't take the step to run their own business because they were told at school that they weren't good at maths, and so they worry they won't handle the financial side of things well. And neuroplasticity in the brain makes a mockery of that. So we have the ability to learn to do anything. We might have to learn it differently. We might have to find novel ways around it, right? But our brains are fully capable. So the idea that someone said to you when you were 12, 13, 14, oh, you're not good with maths, and that should be influencing your business decisions in your 50s, is just nonsense. And so I think we need to let go of some of those limiting beliefs and some of the unhelpful things we've been told about ourselves. And that's not just work, that can go, you know, across our childhood, across all sorts of things. But I think it can take real courage to overcome the voice that we just accepted as children. It can take courage as an adult to challenge that, because we may have held on to that belief. We may have thought, oh, I'd never be good at the financial side of business for 20 years. And suddenly you go, well, maybe I might be. Maybe I'll do that course. Maybe I'll understand a bit more about how the tax system works, and maybe I'll give it a go. Who knows? But I think there is something very powerful about unlearning some of those limiting beliefs and building your confidence, and really discovering, it's quite exciting to discover what you can do that you never thought you'd be able to. So I think that can be really important. And I think from the workplace point of view, I think letting go of the idea that work has to mean one thing. And we are really seeing the clash in people who think work means bums on seats, 9 to 5, you know, commuting, work needs to be hard, you can't have work-life harmony, you've just got to, you know, work first. You're really seeing that clash between people who have a much more flexible way of thinking, make work for them, and people who, no, that's not what work looks like. You know? So I think we're seeing the clash of the titans there, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. Yeah, literally. That, especially, you know, those perceptions of work. But I love that. I mean, unlearning. You're absolutely right. Unlearning those things that we've heard maybe people say about ourselves, or maybe the things that we've, how that affects our ability to find the things that really make us happy or thrive, etc. So important. But also, as you say, those perceptions of work, you know, that work has to be hard, you know, that you mustn't have fun at work, and all of it's, you know, because those are things that we grew up with, you know, very Victorian system, which kind of comes almost like from school as well. It's kind of then inherited up through then into the world of work. But why shouldn't we be able to find happiness in our work, right? Why should it not still be challenging? And you know, maybe we have days when we do have to, you know, push a little bit, but we can still find enjoyment from it, right? So many people don't think that work is something you should enjoy. I feel strange part of our psyche, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not in every culture in every country. So you see where there is more flexibility in school, where people are encouraged more, you know, children are encouraged more to learn through play. They are encouraged to problem solve together rather than, oh, I don't understand, but I'm a bit scared to ask. You know, they're really encouraged to sort of take this team approach. You see that develop in their organizations, and you see they just are happier at work. The wellbeing scores are so much higher. Yeah.
So interesting. Oh, I feel like there's so much more to learn, honestly, but we've got to wrap things up. We've already gone way over. We're going to finish off with we always like leaving people with one thing. So maybe what is the one thing, you know, or the one simple shift that someone could make this week, bearing in mind it's Mental Health Awareness Week. What's the one simple shift that someone could make this week to start being more engaged or more healthy or happy at work? even if their job isn't ideal. So even if they're in a job that maybe doesn't tick all of the boxes for them, doesn't give them meaning, what's maybe one thing they could do?
I think let's start with the job that isn't right, okay? Because we've all had those jobs where we need to put food on the table. It's as simple as that. So we've got bills to pay, so we are in a job that we don't like, and it doesn't set our soul alight. We don't love it, but we get a salary, and that's why we're doing it. And I think when we're in those jobs, it's almost more important. So I know we said one thing, I'm going to sneak in two. So I've got a whole chapter in Reworked on start by stopping. And so I would encourage people to pause and take a breath. And because it's so easy to keep going, and we can kind of spin our wheels just trying to make things work, trying to make it better, trying. And we put all this energy in. I would say start by stopping. Just review, where am I? What is working for me? What isn't working for me? Why am I feeling unhappy? What's going on for me? And what do I need in the immediate? So I would start by stopping. But longer term, if you are in one of those jobs, and again, we've all had them, like, gosh, like I could name 5 that I've done, you know, previously. We've all had those jobs where you just have to do them for the money. Set a time limit, make a plan for those jobs, because they feel very different. Even if it's a long way, even if it's 18 months, I'm in this job for 2 years, 18 months, whatever it may be, you feel different when you go into those jobs. The next meeting you go into, if you're thinking, okay, 2026, end of 2026, I won't be here. I won't be dealing with this. And then you make a plan for, if I don't want to be here, what do I need to do to get out of this, to get somewhere else, to make myself happier, to find a different role, whatever it is. And the reason why I say put a time limit on it and make a plan is because those jobs we take just for the money, sometimes if they break our spirit a little bit, we may have taken them for 6 months and find we're still there 6 years later and we think, what happened? Right? So I think it's really important to have a concrete, written down, could explain it to someone else plan if you're in one of those roles. So I would start by stopping, review where you are, do your immediate kind of needs review, like what is it that I need to be happier, healthier, safer, and more engaged in this space? What can work off for me that's going to make me feel good? And then what's my longer term plan, so that you never feel stuck? Our brains like to feel future focused and plan. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, I love the start by stopping. I've written that down. I was thinking, I need this for myself. This is like a therapy session with Stephanie for me. But then also the bit afterwards, in terms of, you know, almost like having that bit of a plan to move on, particularly if you're not happy, is that links back to what you were saying about control, and, you know, bring it back to, okay, maybe the situation isn't perfect now, but this is what I'm going to do. Right. And literally Matt's comment that's just flashed up. So having a plan really resonates with me. Great idea. Absolutely love it. Stephanie, we're going to have to wrap things up, but this has been so brilliant. Catherine, thank you. Thank you, Catherine and Matt, actually, because I think you've literally been with us since the top of the conversation. Catherine says she has to leave, but she sent you an inquiry via the Soyo mailbox. Where's the best place for people to get in touch with you? Obviously, there is the Soyo mailbox. And what's your website again, Stephanie?
SoyoLimited.com, SoyoLimited.com, so SoyoLTD.com. But also every Friday on workplace_wellbeing on Insta, I post a video about a conversation I've had that week. Very short, and I just post once a week. So no spamming.
Amazing. Absolutely fantastic. And somebody's literally just sneaking a comment in there just as we're leaving. Apologies for joining so late. It's absolutely fine. You watch the recording. Please do enjoy. I know that the recordings, I think, were being clipped for a couple of weeks. So hopefully the whole thing is there. If you can't, if the whole thing isn't on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn has started clipping it to the last 30 minutes, you will be able to find it on YouTube. So I'll maybe drop a link in the comments just to signpost. Loved the session. So Matt has said here, loved the session. Off to buy the book. Oh, you're welcome, Matt. Honestly, I feel as though there was so much that we could have delved into, particularly around the reasons for burnout, because we know that's a massive epidemic. But hopefully we've left you with some rebellious hope this morning. I absolutely love that you're wearing. When you came on in that t-shirt, I was like, I've got to go and get my t-shirt out. So, Stephanie, thank you so much.
Thank you
for your insights and your wisdom, honestly, and for your energy as well. It's been incredible. And thank you to everybody that joined us live and kind of, shared your insights and your reflections. And if you are watching on the replay, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to watch. So yeah, thanks again. I'll see everybody next week. Thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.